Hello and welcome to this week's Bible in the News. As the Israel-Hamas war continues in Gaza, some who would otherwise claim to be anti-racist and liberal chant anti-Semitic lines in the West. Throughout history, God's people Israel have been hated by all the nations around it. From the time Israel was in Egypt, Pharaoh attempted to destroy the nation by killing all the male children in the Nile of Egypt. The Edomites were condemned by Obediah. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. The hatred of the Philistines for the Israelites was called the Old Hatred by Ezekiel. When Israel was scattered from their land in AD 135, they were persecuted wherever they went, and were never allowed to settle or mingle with the local populus. They were blamed for the Black Death and used as scapegoats. They were constantly in fear of pogroms and expulsion, with 100,000 killed in 1,100 different pogroms in just the first few years following the First World War. As the world modernized, it was believed that the old hatred was a thing of the past, but with the rise of Nazism in Germany, the worst was about to come. Over 6 million Jews died during the Holocaust, when the old hatred became mechanized. Theodor Herzl, in his book The Jewish State, argued that if the Jews had a state of their own, then this would be the end of this hatred for the Jews. In 1948, the dream of Herzl became a reality when Israel became a state, but the hatred for the Jews lived on as an hatred of Israel. Now, it is possible for some to criticize the decisions of the Israeli government without it being anti-Semitism, but what we see in the world today goes far above and beyond this in two main ways. Firstly, the world judges Israel in a way that they would judge no other nation. They have expectations of Israel beyond what they would expect of themselves and also other nations in the world. Some claim to be simply criticizing the actions of the Israeli government, but only do it because it is a Jewish state. Secondly, we see Jews with no connection to the government of Israel threatened, harassed, and in some cases attacked. Shouts of "Go back to Poland" were shouted at a Jewish student, and "F the Jews." So many of the chants and slogans in the protests go much further than supporting non-involved Gazans, but support the terror groups that have massacred 767 Jewish civilians, including 36 children, took many captive hostages, and raped countless Jewish women. Banners stating support for, quote, resistance by any means necessary, end quote, to, quote, free Palestine, have been seen around the world. In a context of decades of regular Palestinian suicide bombings, kidnappings, stonings, knifings, all targeting civilians, plus of course October the 7th, when Jewish civilians were massacred, taken hostage and raped, support for resistance by any means necessary can only be taken to supporting the means currently used by the Palestinian groups. In Columbia University, the Hamilton Hall building was seized by protesters who hung a banner with the word Intifada on it. Now, the first Intifada occurred between 1987 and 1993 when a spate of terror attacks murdered nearly 200 Israeli civilians. The second Intifada was much worse and came between the years of 2000 and 2005, which cost another 700 Israeli civilian lives. Again, this shows how the support for Gaza in these protests is not limited to supporting the lives of non-combatants in the war zone. It is an active support for the methods of terrorism used today in the quest of Hamas to destroy the Jewish presence in their homeland. In the context of extreme groups such as Hamas, whose charter states that their number one aim is the destruction of Israel and its inhabitants, those who protest support for Gaza without any effort to distance themselves from the violent terror campaign there against the Jews show active support for it. Some try to claim that these views are only held by a vocal minority, but we see that this goes right up the top. Elizabeth Magill, the president of the University of Pennsylvania, when speaking during a congressional hearing on anti-Semitism, refused to clearly answer whether calling for the genocide of Jews violated the code of the university. She repeatedly stated that it would depend on the context of the call for genocide of the Jews. Those who protest with the slogans "from the river to the sea," "by any means necessary," among them in large print, and choose to stay part of those protests, stay part of a protest saying these things. What we see is the world has not changed. The old hatred talked of by Ezekiel is still alive in this world, even in the most, quote, anti-racist places in the world. We are told that at the time of Christ's return, all nations will be gathered against Jerusalem to battle. We are told that the Gogian host will come against the people of Israel, who have been brought back from the sword. And we see this anti-Semitism that will bring these things to pass still alive in the world today. And so until the time when Christ's return comes to this world, we mourn for Zion. We mourn for the people of Israel, who are hated throughout the world, and pray for the time when Israel will be the head and not the tail, and when Christ rules in peace and righteousness in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for another edition of Bible in the News. This has been Paul Barnes joining you.